Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. Hey, and welcome to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm Sarah Westbrook, your host, joined today by...
Mason Westbrook, the co-host.
Yeah,
that's my title, I think.
Yeah, how are you feeling, Mason, after getting your COVID boosters so that we can go to Italy?
That sounds like a loaded question.
It is a loaded question. I do know how you're feeling.
I did not wake up feeling very well. No, it's Sunday. I was going to head to church, and I sat up and I was like, whoa, I don't think I'm going to church. And I'm feeling mostly better now, but yeah, vaccines don't normally bother me at all, but I guess getting the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine together just...
wiped you out.
A little too much for me, apparently, yeah.
Yeah, y'all, he's functioning today on what is lovingly known as Ranger candy. Isn't that what they call it, Mason? Ranger candy?
That's what Motrin is, yeah.
Yeah, so 800 milligram tablets of Motrin. He took one. They call that Ranger candy because when you're in the military, it doesn't matter if you come in with a toothache or a broken foot, you're going to get some Ranger candy.
Everybody
get back
needs
out
Ranger
there
candy, that's right.
And do what you're supposed to do, get your job done.
Get back out there, you pansy. What the heck?
Gotta love the military. All right, so our topic today is family fallout follow-up, and really what our goal is to share.
You couldn't say that 5 times.
I know. As I was typing it in, I was like, man,
let's hear it.
I can't do it. No, I'm skip. So anyway, we want to kind of share some of the skills that we've learned, number one, going through this, and then things that I've learned in my career, my professional experience in school and whatnot, about how to talk about hard things with the people that we love most. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we iterate here today is that these skills can be applied very broadly in the way that you communicate with anybody on topics that are difficult or that you disagree on, and even talking about things that you do agree on, or with your kids. These skills can definitely be applied very broadly in our communication patterns. Today, we're going to focus on talking about faith transitions or faith crises because we are, unpacking religious trauma. And one of the challenges that come with faith transitions or faith crises is, how do I talk to my family? What are the things that I do? And so some of the things, I think our primary focus today is to recognize when do we want to engage in dialogue and when we need to disengage, or some variation of in between. And I think one of the unfortunate but also good opportunities for us today is, Mason, this is still very new and raw for you. So you've got a little bit of, what happened in the week since you got that, or since you sent out that invite to your family and then the text message was a total shit show. We kind of jumped on the podcast and talked about your feelings. Now let's talk about some follow-up. What happened from that? And then let's really start to dig in. We're also going to have a guest of a sister-in-law who was a part of this conversation. Sister-in-law, I don't know yet if she wants to say her name or not. I'm going to leave that up to her when we introduce her. She can... If she wants to share her name, she can, and if not, then that's just fine. That's her prerogative. And so we're still going to identify siblings by the number of which they responded, with some reminders today. Our goal is not to disparage these siblings, not in any way, but rather demonstrate, Mason, you're the oldest of 6 children.
Right.
And so we got a myriad of responses, and I think that all of these responses are pretty normal. They kind of all fell in line of the types of responses that people get. You've got the people who are supportive, people who are curious, people who are shutting you down. You've got all of these things. And so let's kind of dig into that a little bit. You ready, Mace?
And one of the tags that you said, so in the intent, I love the way that you taught this to one of our children. You said, read the room, right? And I love that tag simply because, again, I'm kind of a one-liner guy. I think that came up once before. I like the simple little tags that help keep something in perspective for me. And wow, that was loud. Yeah.
Yeah,
You want some water there?
Opening my water bottle was very clicky.
So read the room. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. You know, when to engage, when not to engage, I think is what you said. But
Yeah.
just recognizing the room there. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a weird week.
Yeah. So, Mason, why was it a weird week? I think you have talked. I'm actually going to answer the question myself. Hey, Mason, why is it a weird week? Never mind. Don't talk. Let me tell you why it was a weird week.
I hate those people that ask questions and answer their own questions. Like, it makes them look smart or something. You know
Right.
what? Those aren't hard questions.
All right. So let me rephrase that question. So, Mason, you've had an opportunity this week to have prolonged conversations with several family members that you really don't engage with in that way or haven't engaged with in that way in a really long time. How has your week gone?
Well, so first off, I'm not very good at engaging with my family on a regular basis anyway. When I engage, I usually do a pretty decent job, but I typically only engage when my wife says, hey, you should call your mom. And
What?
I go, oh, okay, I'll call my mom. And I love it. Like I'm not avoiding the conversations because I enjoy them. I just don't think about them as much, and so don't do them. But so this week, just a quick little follow-up. I sent out a text to all of my family, basically inviting them, letting them know that the Unpacking Mormonism podcast was going to be coming up on this past Monday. I would love for you guys to participate if you feel like you're in a good place to do that. And if you don't feel like you're in a good place to do that, please don't participate. Don't listen. I understand and expect that some of it will be a little triggering for you. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And then that opened a whole host of things, some that was expected, some that certainly wasn't expected. And we talked a little bit about that in the first podcast, I think, and then in the second one.
So hang on, I'm going to pause you. So first podcast on this topic.
On this topic, yes.
So I believe that would have been number 9.
Well, hold on a second.
Yeah, let's go back because we had our first guest speaker somewhere in there as well.
Yeah,
which I think that's
number 9.
So number 9, we got I sent the invitation out and one sister had responded who we've identified as sister number 1 based on the order in which they responded. And then episode 10 is where we really dug into what had happened. So like later the night, so we recorded episode 9. Later that night, we have this shit show of texts. Episode 10 is us coming in the morning after that, kind of processing with you where you are. And then today's episode is 1 week later. Because when you say Monday, we're like recording episode 11, but this coming week for the listener, they're only going to be hearing episode number 4. So you're going to be hearing this listener at this point in several weeks.
Yeah, weeks after it's happened, yeah.
And
it may not be episodes 9, 10, and 11 at that point in time.
It should be at this point.
We may break them up. But yeah, so in episode 9, we talked a little bit about the love equals loyalty, obedience thing with Jeffrey R. Holland.
Right.
And then in 10, we talked a lot about what had happened, the fallout and stuff. So
number 10 was our check-in with Mason.
Right.
Or was that at a different one? Because we talked about Mason and your family quite a bit.
But it was more of a check-in about, where are you, how are you handling all of this kind of stuff. And then the 10 was checking in again after all the fallout from the texts and stuff. So
wow. How does it feel to be the one we're focusing on?
It's odd. I'm not sure I really appreciate it or enjoy it.
Okay, so do we need to not record
no,
this?
not at all.
Because I don't want anybody to be I don't want you to be uncomfortable or
should not
on
have
the
said
spot.
I don't appreciate it.
Should jar.
Yeah. Bleh. If for those of you who can't see, that was me sticking out my tongue at her. I did not mean to say unappreciated. I'm grateful to be able to talk about these things, but they're hard things. And like you said, the intent is not to throw anybody under the bus because I believe that people are doing the best that they can. And I think that that's the case for my family too.
So let's talk about the order of responses, and if there's some variance, because I think when we had done this, we had mislabeled some of it, but we're going to go ahead and stick with those on purpose. So Mason, sister number 1. So just a reminder for the listener, sister number 1 is the sister who responded first, she responded to you individually with a statement, something to the effect of, I can't follow you on the path you're on right now. And then later in the evening, when that string of texts just turned into a total shit show, she's the one that both of us, as well as one of your brothers, had felt like that she compared you to Laman, Lemuel, and Cain. So what was your follow-up with sister number one?
So first, just to be fair, the very first thing she asked me was, tell me about the podcast. So I appreciated that because it was a curious question. It didn't really stay curious, but it was a curious question. I appreciated that. I explained that to her.
Yeah.
And then after I explained it to her, she's like, yeah, I can't follow the path you're walking down. And she was all worried about me. And I respect that, but it seems to be kind of a common theme for people to say.
Well, and I would say that is a response that those of us who are walking away, or for those of us who are transitioning, it's fair to give our family members or the people that we love the opportunity to be concerned about us.
Yeah.
Because their worldview is that you are walking away from something with deep spiritual significance. You're giving up a lot of blessings. And because that is their reality, that concern about your well-being is normal, natural, healthy.
Yeah.
I would say it's a demonstration of the depth of their love.
I think sometimes it can make us a little annoyed or upset because, they're concerned about us. But I agree, that needs to be something we hold space for, because they're just trying to stand up for what they believe and help their family members walk the path that they think is the right one.
But see, I wouldn't go into that, because you're turning it around on them. I would say, let's keep this individualized from their worldview. So from sister number one's worldview, her concern for you on this path you're walking has to do with her love and appreciation for you.
Yes.
And the shutting out most likely has to do with fear that she's going to stumble and fall into this place. Then let's draw a line here. That's her response to you was about her feelings, emotions, and perspectives.
Yes.
And then your response to that, it's normal for those of us in faith transition to feel frustrated and irritated. And why can't you see things the way I do? How are you so blind? All these things are now in plain view. Well, they're not in plain view for her. So it's also normal and expected for the person in faith transition to be a little bit annoyed and irritated and frustrated about why can't you just accept me and whatnot. And so there's a huge separation in worldview. And until you're able to bridge that gap to have open communication, the potential for it to be kind of a thought stopping, you need to be quiet, you're not listening, that's a normal response. And that's where we need to be able to, as you said earlier, Mason, read the room.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. And I appreciate the kind of talking that out in such a way as to help us be able to appreciate where they are. Because ultimately that's what we want from them, is for them to be able to appreciate where we are. So we have to be able to do the same thing if we want to be able to formulate a relationship that is going to work through the process. I mean, obviously, if that's not what you're wanting, then you don't have to do that at all.
Right.
But if what you're wanting is to continue a relationship or to build a relationship maybe where there wasn't a really good relationship before, you're going to have to be able to see where they are and do some introspection and see where you are and be able to talk that out.
Right. So what I'm going to say before we move into the follow-up of what happened between you and sister number one over the last week, I want to clarify for the listener that oftentimes you're going to hear in therapy or memes or life coaching that their response is about them, not you. This is what we're talking about. So sister number one's response of, I can't listen, I can't follow you, that is about sister number one's fear.
Right. That's where she is.
Right. That is where she is at. And that's why that response is about her. And then, Mason, your response of maybe irritation of not being heard, maybe that feeling of not being supported, kind of that frustration that I'm going to say this goes out to all of those in faith transition. Why won't you read the stuff? Don't you want to know the truth? That irritation and frustration and angst is about you, the person in faith transition, and not as much about the family member that's stopping it as we would like to think. Yeah. And that the road to open communication that will lead to curious dialogue, understanding, and connection is the skill that we're going to talk about later today in how to build that bridge between sister's worldview and then Mason, your worldview, right. Or for our listeners, person in faith transitions worldview and the person still within that faith community's right, worldview. How do we put those bridges together so that communication can land us in a healthy, connected place where we can respect the differences of opinion, belief, placement in right. our life journey, so on and so forth.
Well, and it feels like learning these tools will then translate into lots of different aspects in your life, right? This isn't just about religion. It's about being in business with somebody or, right. yeah, just all kinds of stuff. So
absolutely. All right. So Mason, go ahead. What has your week of conversation been like with sister number one?
Okay. So I went over the stuff that initially happened. Really what happened after that is she sent me a series of voice texts, which I like because they come with the emotion of what's going on, but I don't like because they're much harder to reference in the as I go forward. But she apologized for the misunderstanding about the whole Cain and Laman and Lemuel thing. That's not what she meant. And the way that she said that was very understanding.
And a very effective apology. She didn't just say, you misunderstood me, that's right. your fault. She took ownership and said, that was not my intent. I'm right. sorry it came off that way. I can see how it came off that way. Like, she did a really good job at that.
Yes, and I appreciate that. We'll talk about apologizing, of course, in a later podcast, but the way that you apologize certainly makes a big difference.
Well, actually, let's go ahead and do that now. I'd like to do a shout out for a book recommendation right now. One of the things that I really admired is that sister number one. I don't know if she's ever read this book, but she followed all of the tools or all of the steps for an effective apology. And the book that I love on this topic for our listeners is the book called Why Won't You Apologize by Harriet Lerner. And one of the things I love about that book is it talks about the steps for effective apology, but it also talks about some of the barriers that people may be struggling with in giving apologies as well as receiving those apologies. So plug into that book. Readers, listeners, go out, read that book. It's great. I know I'm going to be adding so much reading material over the course of the period. Add it to your list, whatever. It is phenomenal. It is worth your time and energy, especially if there's some struggle with apology going on in your life.
And it's not long either.
It's not long. And I liked that audio book. I liked it as the audio book because Harriet Lerner, I believe, read that audiobook and did so with a lot of feeling and intention. And I really enjoy consuming stuff like that. But excellent book. And yes, we will be doing a full episode on apologies at a later date. So back to you, Mason, and sister number one.
Another thought there, actually, on the podcast that Brene Brown does, which is Unlocking Us. She does an episode with Harriet Lerner and talks about that. Was also very helpful.
Yeah, so maybe like in our show notes, let's put a link to that episode of Brene Brown Unlocking Us, because I agree it was very beautifully done. And listener, we definitely want to guide you to resources that you can study on your own in between the weeks of our, podcast and so on, and really want to give you the tools and the resources that are available to you. That one is definitely in my top 15 reading list for self-help books. Absolutely. All right. Yeah. So Mason, sister number one, keep going.
Certainly changed my life as well. So very, very good material there. Mm-hmm. So that was how she started. Secondly, she she got very vulnerable from herself and talked about her own self-esteem issues, how she kind of has had to fake things for a long time and does not feel very valuable or very self-assured. She also talked about, acknowledged that our emotional maturity, we weren't really modeled what emotional maturity is in our home, and nothing, and she acknowledged it. I'm going to say it again. Nothing bad about my parents. They did the best that they knew how to do, but they didn't know how to do that.
Right. They didn't have those skills either.
They didn't have those skills. And so I think we all suffered from that a little bit, some more than others, of course. But it is hard to learn emotional maturity if you grew up in a home where it wasn't modeled for you.
Well, where it wasn't modeled, and also where it wasn't safe to have out loud emotional responses.
Yes.
I mean, because it wasn't modeled well for me either growing up. Abby is paging us from the other room, so I'm going to pause this here in a minute. But so let me just finish my thought. It wasn't modeled for me growing up either. But as you and I got married, one of the things that we did is we said we do not want to have a home environment that either one of us had grown up in. And so I would say we did much better with that. And as we've allowed our children to have those out loud emotional responses, they have then inherited, or not inherited, but developed that emotional maturity better than you or I did. And I'm so grateful to all of the resources available to do that.
So as I was saying, she recognized that emotional maturity...
Sister number one
recognized that emotional maturity was not modeled for her, and mentioned how that has affected some of her personal relationships. And I recognize that some of that has affected my personal relationships too. And
right, so you could really connect over that.
It was a connecting thing. She was vulnerable. It allowed me to respond and be vulnerable to her as well, and share some of where I am, and some of the concerns that I have. And ultimately, I think the big thing is it was a very positive experience that allowed us to connect on a deeper level than we have in a long time, if ever.
Right.
And hopefully be able to go forward with a lot more understanding of each other and where we are.
See, and I love that. I love that because her comments were probably some of the most hurtful towards you.
They sounded that way, at least. Yeah, I don't think they actually were, but they sounded that way.
And yet you're walking away feeling more connected. You guys found that common ground, like you were able to connect over some of the similarities of your life struggles. And while you didn't walk away in agreement of your podcast is good and she's going to listen to it, I don't think any of that has really changed.
I don't think so.
Which is fine.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we don't. If our goal is to change somebody's mind or to change their status within an organization, then we're coming at things in a way that I'm going to say is somewhat flawed. Like, I understand that hope and that desire, but it's not going to lead to healthy connection in the relationship if somebody's not ready. Like, if somebody comes to you and is like, all right, I'm struggling with the church as well. Let's talk about your struggles and see where I align. Sure. You're going to that would be a good time to bring that in. But with sister number one, the goal was not to get her to listen. The goal was not to, alter her testimony in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormon Church. That was not the goal. The goal was understanding and connection. And I think that you and sister number one were able to accomplish that, or at least plant some really healthy seeds for that to grow as long as you guys continue to nurture it in this communication pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Agree.
Love it. How about sister number one's husband? So again, reminder of sister number one's husband. He is a police officer, which was, the reason I bring this up is because I feel like his comments were somewhat bullying, and there's kind of a power grab there, and there's some concern because there is a lot of that happens in our law enforcement. However, I've also worked with law enforcement off and on, like throughout my career, and so that this does not mean, he was a bully and he's law enforcement, therefore all law enforcement officers are bullies.
Right, not at all.
But rather, hey, we've got to kind of see this pattern that maybe needs to be checked, and mostly that my guess is he was taking a protective stance for his family and attacked my character. This is the one that said that I have a big head, that me getting a degree doesn't make anything that I say valid, and that listening to me would be the world's biggest waste of time. What's been the follow-up with brother-in-law?
So I sent him a text that basically just talked about how I was surprised by that character. I thought he had a different character than that, and just to belittle somebody in a conversation didn't seem like the kind of person that he was. I tried to keep that very kind. I think that I did that, but of course, it might not have been perceived that way. But the response from him has been nil. It's just crickets.
Absolutely crickets. I really appreciated that you did that, because you also kind of set a boundary there of stop talking to my wife like that. Like, you've had
and I didn't say that specifically. If something else were to come up, that's exactly the plan, is just to say, don't talk to my wife that way. And normally that's probably something I would have said in that string of texts. And I didn't. And it's partly because I was just done with that conversation. Right. The conversation went in an entirely different direction than what I was expecting. Right. And so I just wasn't prepared for all of that.
Which I also think is somewhat normal. When you are in the middle of a crisis, your amygdala has kicked in. And so being able to show up in a way that you would normally show up if you weren't the one in crisis mode, that's pretty normal. Because it's odd for you to not be like, hey, don't talk about my wife like that. That's not okay. Like, that would be your normal response. The fact that you didn't tells me just how, difficult this was for you in the moment.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to recognize that when somebody is experiencing their own crisis, brain goes into my own survival, and it has a much harder time kind of coming outward and saying, hey, and you need to not do this for my wife. And I think a lot of times the unprotected person within the relationship gets really upset because the person in crisis didn't respond in a certain way.
Yeah.
So I think we need to make a little bit of allowance there.
I think it can be good to recognize that's what's going on, right? The whole conversation about the amygdala was so that we can understand a little bit better how our brain works, quote, works or not works during those time periods of hardship. And the big piece that I wanted to come out in that whole interaction with that brother-in-law, is that from our very first episode, we said that one of the things we're not here to do is to malign character. And I just want to point out that when people do that, sometimes it's because they're in their amygdala. They're trying to just be defensive. Oftentimes it's because they're trying to shut down the conversation. And what we've found, as we've talked about this, is that oftentimes that happens, especially in Mormonism, because it feels like true believing Mormons are allowed to say whatever they want to say in defense of the church. But the people that are not, quote unquote, true believing Mormons are just supposed to shut up. And so oftentimes their character gets maligned simply because they're trying to shut up the conversation. There's no room for open communication. It's like, no, we're not talking about that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's my experience as well with those members who are maybe not in a place where they're ready for open dialogue. Even when I don't talk about the church, they don't want me to say things. It's very much you're not allowed to talk. I'm allowed to preach to you. I'm allowed to bear my testimony to you.
I'm trying to save your soul.
Right. I'm trying to save your soul. I'm allowed to lecture you and tell you where you're wrong. But as soon as you open your mouth, I have to shut things down because
you're trying to hurt my soul.
Right. You're trying to hurt me. And that kind of falls in line with that persecution complex that we talked about, that it doesn't matter what Sarah the apostate says. It's threatening, it's dangerous. I'm not willing to listen. I'm not willing to hear her voice and even consider that opinion because she's dangerous. Even though I'm not physically dangerous, I'm apparently spiritually dangerous to them now. And so, and also to recognize that, again, that's a normal amygdala response.
Right.
I have to, Sarah, if I'm being viewed that way, I need to be able to recognize that in the person that I'm trying to communicate with, and then, do a little dance in my dialogue in order to communicate. And a lot of times that means this person isn't ready. I just need to disengage from the conversation. And unfortunately, that disengagement can often be misinterpreted what is my intent? I know that in your family conversations, and one of the things that you brought up with sister number one was Sarah's silence isn't meant to ostracize you. She's not engaging in where she's at with the church because she doesn't want to harm your testimony,
Right.
which is 100% true. I don't even remember how long it was, but when I came out, when I told you, hey, I'm not going to be a member of the church anymore, and then like 6 to 8 months later, I said, it's time for us to make this announcement to your family. One of the things that I had texted was, I'm leaving the church and I don't really want to talk about it. I love you, want to keep positive relationships.
Right.
One of the things that was said was, well, Sarah doesn't want to talk about the church because she wants attention. And I thought that was really interesting. No, I'm not talking about it because I don't want the attention. Not sure how my silence is attention seeking, although I'm sure some people use the silent treatment to, to get some attention.
That's hard to do though with people that you're not actually talking to.
Right, I'm not
much.
physically in the same room. I'm going
to be silent with this person I haven't talked to in 6 months. Well, that's not going to get you what you're looking for.
Yeah, that was an odd, but again, that was about where they were at rather than where I was at. And It took you pointing out, I don't know, probably 6 months ago, because I think it was sister number one again that said this, Sarah was silent to get attention. It was like, no, Sarah was silent because she didn't want to harm your testimony or be perceived as somebody actively trying to harm your testimony. And so one of the things I really liked about sister-in-law or sister number one's response is that she's demonstrating emotional growth and maturity, which has been a nice thing to see over the course of this. While that's not with me specifically, which is partially my fault too. I'm just still not quite ready to engage with your family. I'm just not in that way. But definitely towards you, I've seen that growth, and that's been really encouraging. So, hey, listeners, recognize that, again, when somebody's attacking your character or if they're shutting you down, that's a really good sign that they are not in an emotional place to get curious and respond in the way you need or want them to. And in that case, oftentimes the best thing to do is just shift subjects and respect where their brain is at, and lean into those people who you can connect with and relate to, especially in those ex-Mormon or ex-Jehovah Witness or ex-Catholic, those groups where you've got lots of people who have experienced that same thing. Go to them and vent those frustrations so that way you can honor the place where the people are at, so you can honor their brain space. Because with brother-in-law who attacked my character, you kind of set a boundary with them, but you're not like chasing him now with that boundary. Right. He's been crickets,
and no
but
intention
so have
of doing
you.
that.
Mason, you had started to break in and say something, and I just kept talking. Was there something else you wanted to add before we move into the next one?
Yeah, I was thinking about, so this is in the interest of having an open conversation, right? If we recognize, like you said, if they're maligning our character, we need to be able to recognize that and go, you know what, this is not going where I want it to go. Unless you're just trying to make people mad, maybe you are sometimes. Right. But if you're actually trying to have an open dialogue, that can be one of the cues. This isn't what's working. Well, one of the things that sister number one talked about was about the family tension that was obvious in that line of text. Mm-hmm. And I said, I felt that. And she said, I hope you realize that family tension is just because we love you so much. And I said, okay, maybe, but I think the family tension is because they're not ready for an open dialogue.
I would agree with you.
So
that the tension is there because everybody's in their amygdala space, not because they love you, but because they're not in a brain space where communication feels safe.
Right.
Yet nobody's, or very few of them. I would not say nobody, because we're going to get into sister number two here in a minute.
Some of them are in a good place.
Right. They're in a place where they can be like, I'm not ready to engage with this. I have to move away. And so, but yeah, I think that tension is there because everybody is feeling like not everybody. Again, I said everybody. Oh my goodness, Sarah, I'm sorry about that, listener.
Your all-inclusive words are just overcoming you today.
Yeah, that's a problem. Okay, so let me rephrase that. Many of the individuals in that text string were in their amygdala and did not yet or do not yet have the skills to know when to stop before they've harmed.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring that up because if in a conversation we can recognize that when someone says, well, the tension is because we love you, don't just take that at face value. And I'm not saying that they don't love me. I'm just saying that that's not the reason for the tension.
Right.
And so if I can recognize that the tension is really because they're not ready for an open dialogue, cues, again, reading
Read
the
the room.
going, yep, that's a sure sign that they're not ready for this conversation. I need to go ahead. In this case, I need to go ahead and just bow out and say, and that's what I did. I was like, hey, I'm done with this conversation. There's too much crap going on. I'm done. This isn't what I was going for, and I'm bowing out.
Right. So Mason, how about sister number 2? So sister number 2 is the one that reached out in the family text and asked an honest question, what's going on here? What is the podcast about? I'm trying to gauge if it's something I'm interested in. And both of us walked away from that feeling as though that sister had been very open and curious and inquisitive. And a lot of that is because we've had a lot of engagement with this sister in the past. Unfortunately, this sister's
during
had
some difficult situations.
Yeah, unfortunately, this sister's had some shit thrown at her. I mean, life has just beat her down a lot in a way that you and I are aware of, because we've had an ongoing active relationship with this individual for the last, I'm going to say 10 years or so. We've been really engaged with this sister. So her questions were taken more in a curious way. What was your follow-up with sister number 2?
And I appreciate the fact that even with follow-up questions, she just stayed curious. She just wanted to know, because she's trying to protect herself from where she is emotionally. Mm-hmm. And I respect that 100%. Well, I was able to talk with her the other night, and we just sat and chatted for an hour, and we talked about that, and didn't necessarily talk about anything specific, or, there was no trying to convince, hey, yeah, you need to listen to this. Although after talking, I think that she's more in a place where she realizes that this probably would work out well for her. Mm-hmm. But again, just the conversation, just being able to talk and just feel like I don't have any issues being vulnerable with her any more than anybody else. Like I'm not very good at being vulnerable, but I could be vulnerable with her, and have been at times if I felt it was appropriate. And so mostly that was just a confirmation of the fact that we have a strong relationship, and that it stayed the same regardless of what's going on with this podcast. And so I really appreciated that.
Yeah, me too. I loved how after the family thing, she sent you a text that was like, I'm sorry if that was offensive. That was not my intent. Like
she was checking in like crazy to make sure that...
Yeah.
Yes.
She was actively engaged in checking in on an individual basis to make sure that her intent was clear, but also open to correction if we had misread the intent. And it really warms my heart, because I didn't know that you had talked to sister number 2. Because I think you did that while you were waiting for Katie to get home from a late night youth activity.
Yes.
And it really warms my heart to know that the check-in was really a reinforcing and a nurturing of a relationship that had already been established.
Yes.
And that's also a really important thing, that for our listeners, once you've cut through I'm going to say the red tape, that resistance that comes in the beginning, once you've built that bridge, you need to continue to nurture it in order for that bridge to stay alive. And I think that you and sister number 2 do the best job that you can. I mean, you both live incredibly busy lives. You're both raising, teenagers and toddlers and adult children. And absolutely.
Life's
so life is busy. But when the two of you reconnect, you tend to do a good job of connecting and nurturing that bridge. So I was very appreciative that the relationship that was already strong stayed strong.
Yeah, we certainly don't argue about anything. We just look to understand where each other are and then go from there.
Right. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the way that sister's had to show up because of her own life challenges.
Oh, yeah. She basically said, when I talked to her, I'm just tired of fighting over stuff that doesn't need to be fought about. It's like, I appreciate that. I think that that's great some of that just comes from exhaustion. There's been times where I probably wanted to fight something. I'm just like, I'm not going to. I'm just too tired to fight this. I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing in general, but sometimes it's a very good thing. I'm not going to fight about this because there's just no reason to.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, sometimes that exhaustion of, I just don't want to fight this. I don't have any more words for this. And then you disengage because of exhaustion. That's also a sign of what we call stonewalling. Yeah. And that's kind of where I am with your family. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not trying to stonewall your family, but any kind of engagement has been so toxic over the last several years that I'm stonewalling for my own protection. I'm too tired to engage. I don't have the energy anymore. I tried for years. I feel like that failed. Probably some my responsibility, some their responsibility. I'm not blaming anybody here, but I'm recognizing that I'm too exhausted to try and pick up those pieces today.
I told that to Sister One, too, in our conversation, is that some of the reason that you and I have not been able to form a good relationship is because, frankly, over the last year and a half, most of my energy has gone to healing my own relationship with you and with my children, and that's more important. Even like the church stuff, everybody keeps asking, well, where are you? Where are you? And my answer usually is, I'm not exactly sure. But I figured out when I was talking with her why. It's mostly because something else has my attention right now. It's not that I've lost faith in the Mormon church or that I'm ready to leave it. It's that my focus has been on helping you and me heal our relationship, helping you make the transition that you're making, starting this podcast, doing those kinds of things so that the voice can get out. And I imagine that sooner or later, I'll figure out where I am and then attack that in full force again, whether it be that I walk away or I stay active. I'm going to attack that full force again and say, now it's time. Now it's time for me to sort through this, and I will.
Right. Well, and I want to clarify for the listeners, the challenges you and I have had, maybe my leaving the church kind of pushed you into a place of action, but really what we've been working on is you opening up emotionally and me letting you and holding space for that. We've been doing emotional work where you're gaining more emotional maturity and I'm letting you in again because you're able to connect. That's been our work. It really hasn't been about the church. Like we have not engaged. Like I think we've done a really good job of saying, okay, this is what Sarah believes. This is what Mason believes. And we're going to connect around this because we've gotten to a place where you don't have to agree with me in order for us to have healthy connection and belonging within the relationship.
Well, some of that just came from me understanding, what does it mean to validate somebody? Because validation does not mean that you agree with what they're saying, simply that you're holding space for what they're saying, that their reality is real for them, and I can hold that space. So, it's been a journey, but mostly it's been around me becoming emotionally available and learning how to do that and for us to come together in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I like that. And I think that's also another, hey, listener, take this as an important tip. Validation does not mean agreeing. Validation is a step to building understanding and connection so that you can have open dialogue with the intent to respect the differences and still maintain the connection, the emotional connection that you have with that individual. Yeah.
There was a book actually on that one too. I think it's called I Hear You. That was helpful.
Yes,
it's
by Michael Sorensen, I believe.
Okay, yeah. So we'll write that one down too. That was helpful just in kind of learning what it means to validate and how to accomplish it, because validation is incredibly important. And we spent a lot of time talking about that. And I'm still working on that because I don't always validate the way that I need to. But it's been a huge improvement in how things work because I've learned that I can validate this without any harm to me. It only improves us.
Right. So from my professional perspective, I like the book I Hear You, which I believe is written by Michael Sorensen. Check the show notes if you're interested in that. I feel that book is very limited, though, in the sense of it gives the basics how to.
Yes.
But I don't really feel like it digs into the why it's important
or the
neurological understanding of what goes on in the brain when you're successful at it. So it's very good as a, like, I almost want to say how to validate for dummies, like the dummy, the For Dummies.
I think I only ended up reading a few chapters of it because as it went through, I was like, okay, I get what you're saying. This all makes sense to me. But the how-to was only a small piece of what I needed. So it was very helpful in that aspect, but it was certainly was not all encompassing when it comes to understanding validation and how and why.
Right. Well, and I still recommend that book in my profession when I see somebody struggling to figure out how to do it and they need more examples, or they just need to be like, I need a script to follow until this finally clicks in my brain.
Absolutely.
That is absolutely the book that I will recommend for individuals in that place. But I do want the listeners to know, I feel like that book is limited. I would actually say, hey, go to the Gottman stuff, the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. That book really talks about the science and the research behind how validation empowers communication rather than shutting it down.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so what's next?
So brother number 1 is who is next. So just a reminder for the listeners, brother number 1 is the brother that sent me the messages on over a year ago about your marriage is doomed, you're going to lose your friends and family, blah, blah, blah.
Had some very happy things to say.
Right.
Yes.
And then brother number 1 is the one in this most recent one that bore his testimony. These are the most important things in my life. I'm not willing to, the Mormon church is responsible for all the good things in my life, and I'm not willing to walk away from it. He shut down that conversation and then later sent you that individual message saying, this is all your fault. This whole shit show of text is your fault. You knew that when you were sending the text that it was going to turn into this. You need to fix this. And what communication have you gotten with brother number 1?
Let me just give just a tiny little bit of background here. So this is my brother closest to me in my life.
Closest to you in age or closest to you in general?
Both. Because we were closest in age, we did everything together.
Right,
as
you guys
kids.
grew up together.
He's very strong-willed, something more than I am, and I've always respected that about him. He sticks to his guns about the things that he believes in. I appreciate that. He's the only person I've ever punched in the face, and I absolutely love him.
Over pants not being folded up.
Yeah,
on the side of the bed.
He wouldn't clean up his clothes off the floor, yeah.
How old were you?
Oh, I don't know, 13, 14, probably.
There was some testosterone surges going on
Maybe.
So, all right, go ahead.
Anyway, absolutely love him. Mm-hmm. And so, again, not trying to disparage him at all, but there's lessons that we can learn from this communication about how we can go forward. So the first thing that you mentioned is that he shared his testimony, and I had to write that down because I feel like that happens a lot. Like, oh, I'm sorry you're going through this. I just want you to know I believe it's true. And it seems like that's one of those like really genuine things. And I'm not saying they're not genuine in their testimony, but it's like one of those genuine things to just help pull you back from the brink, right? But what I think is actually happening is sharing the testimony is avoiding the issue.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so I just want us to recognize that when someone takes the time, first off, like the very first thing he said was, the Mormon church has given me the 2 most important things in my life, and I would never walk away from it before I die, and I just don't want to hear anything that you have to say. When he does it that way, it's a cue to me, as the listener, he's not in a place to talk about the issues.
Right.
And I need to be able to just then step away or address them in a different way, but recognize that if I try and address the issues, I'm probably not going to get anywhere with them.
Right. Well, and this is the brother that when you said, hey, I really feel like you owe my wife an apology, he was the brother that said something along the lines of, you know what, you just need to recognize that sometimes I'm an asshole and get over it. And while that can be a really difficult thing to hear and frustrating because it doesn't set things up for healthy connections within a relationship, he also has very much told you exactly what he needs in a relationship, and that is take my shit and I'm just going to take yours and get over it, and we're never going to talk about it. And so I think that while the boundary was stated in a really toxic way that doesn't promote connection, it's still the boundary that he placed, and you can honor that by saying, I'm going to chalk this up to he's being an asshole.
Right.
And if I don't like it, I'm going to have to boundary things up because he's already told me on more than one occasion that coming back for apology and working it out is not something that he's in the mind space of doing, and he does not feel that that's valuable to relationships. While I completely disagree based on everything that I've experienced and worked for in my clinic, and this time I can comfortably use that all-inclusive word, everything, dialoguing after a regrettable incident is vital to healing. Being silent and just moving on as if nothing bad happened is going to cause festering, and it will slowly erode relationships, or fast.
Yeah.
It can be fast erosion as
absolutely.
well, but it's just not healthy.
Yeah. Well, my thought on that is that boundaries are healthy, right? We'll talk about that more. We've mentioned it a couple times.
Some boundaries are healthy and some are not.
Well, boundaries in general are healthy, but sometimes we have unhealthy boundaries and sometimes we have healthy boundaries. But whether or not I like the boundary that he's set up, it is there.
Right,
Like
it's
you just
his
said,
boundary.
It is his boundary, and I just need to recognize that if I want to have communication with him, I have to take that into account. Because I can't change who he is.
Right.
Not without his permission, and I'm not going to get that, at least not right now. So
Right. That's
that
who
was
he
the big
is,
deal.
and that's where he's at.
Well, and then you talked about, the blame thing. He blamed me for the whole conversation.
Right. He used you as a scapegoat.
Right. And I told him I did no such thing. I didn't, he said that I'd written that text to start a fight. And I said, no, I didn't. And, for me, that's just setting the boundary. That is not what my intention was. And I clarified some of the reasons why it's clear that that's not what I did. And he wasn't in a place to hear it. And that's okay. So there's been no contact with him at all. I expect that will probably continue for a while. And that's just kind of how it is with that brother.
Okay. What about brother number 2? So brother number 2 and his wife, who is going to be coming on as a guest here in a little bit to talk about her experiences, because she's never been, well, I guess she was Mormon, but it was that she got baptized in order to get married to your brother, not recognizing what, I'm going to say she's one of those people that got baptized without informed consent. And once she recognized what she had committed to, she did some backpedaling very, very quickly.
Right.
And I will let her share that story either today or at a future podcast, because she's agreed to come on as a guest and talk about like the 5 things the missionaries never told her or something along those lines.
So that brother has been...
I want to, let me remind our listener, this is the brother that attempted to advocate for you and encourage open communication within the text string, and he got shot down with the same vehemence as you did.
Yeah. So this is a brother that has struggled with his own membership throughout the years, active, not active, and he's again married to someone who is not active in the church and has some strong feelings about that, and so that's made his pathway a little tough as well. And frankly, over the years, it feels like he's gotten some of the same stuff from my family that I'm getting right now.
Right.
Just kind of the bullying. This is so important. You gotta follow it.
Right. That you have to follow this, but not being open to hearing where his concerns are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Or the fact that maybe his relationship can't handle the fight to stay active in the church. And at the moment, he's chosen to keep his relationship strong. They've got a bunch of kids. They want to be able to be successful. And sometimes the church can't survive that kind of a relationship. And so that's his choice to make. I appreciated his advocating. Mostly what he said was, why wouldn't we want to listen to? I think it's good to see things from different perspectives, which makes sense from him. And I appreciated that. And we have not had much of a relationship over the years. Again, I have not been very good at really keeping in contact with my family. And he was young enough when I left on my mission, there wasn't much of a relationship there. And then I got married shortly thereafter. So I just haven't been close to him and his family to gain that.
Right. But I would say that in recent past, you and he have really started to bridge that gap and have more dialogue and whatnot.
Well, now we have something
tolerated.
in common. We both have wives that aren't interested in being a part of the church.
Right.
And that is a bonding thing. At least we have something that we can understand from each other. And that's very helpful. I'm hoping that I can pursue that and make that into a good and powerful relationship for both of us.
Awesome. Yeah, I really liked, because we also had a behind the scenes dialogue with him, his wife, and you and I, where we were just kind of like, sheesh, this is hard. I've been there. I've been the victim of brother number one's
Yes.
harsh accusations. I get it. So there was a lot of
well, and he doesn't see it that
validating
way.
and connection.
That's part of the issue with brother number one too, is he doesn't see it that way. He doesn't see his comments as being harsh
Or hurtful.
They're just true.
Right.
They're just how I feel.
Right. And because it's
and
truth,
I respect
you just need to deal with it.
But I respect more when you're able to see what your truth is and still respect the people around you.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. And how about with your father? So just a reminder, father on this. So mom, I think your mom said something along the lines of, I'm still thinking about it, which
Right.
I think was fair. But then your father kind of said some stuff. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he kind of had this almost passive something going on. There was a lack of engagement with a statement of, I was afraid this conversation was going to turn into this, but really no action. What's been the follow-up with your father since then?
So my dad has been the one that has reached out to me the most in this situation. And so we were able to sit and chat again this week as well for about 3 hours. And some of it is over church stuff, some of it's not. The real issue that I have with my dad is I think because I keep saying I'm not sure where I am with the church, he's taking that as a cue that he needs to testify and talk about the hard things and unravel the arguments, because he's done more. Like, he's listened to some of the Mormonism Live things and some of the Mormon Stories thing. He's done more to investigate where I am than anybody else.
He's also read, I think, Rough Stuff.
And he's
Rough
reading
Stone Rolling.
Right, he's
by
reading
Richard
that right
Bushman.
now.
You need to add that one to
Yeah,
the show notes there too.
He's doing that right now, and I really appreciate that. You know, he's done a lot to try and understand where I am, but I think because I keep saying I don't know where I am, he's taking that as, well, I got to keep filling this hole, yeah. And I talked to him about that a little bit too. I was like, Dad, really what I need from you is just to understand where I am. Not where you think I am or where you think I need to be, just understand where I am, what is concerning for me. And we talked about some of those things. I think both things that we've talked on this podcast about previously, like the abuse thing, the AP article from Arizona.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I'm hearing some contradiction here that I want to call to your attention. And you said, I don't know where I am, but then there's an expectation that your dad is supposed to understand where you are. That's kind of a difficult thing. Are you inadvertently putting your dad into this impossible situation of, I don't know where I am, Dad, and I need you to understand where I am?
That's a very good call out. I don't think that is what I'm doing, so I must have just misspoken that. It's not that I need him to understand where I am, more that I need him to understand why some of the things that I've said are concerning. So really what I hear you saying is you need some validation from your dad that says, yeah, Mason, I get that this issue is concerning. I don't really have a good response for it either, rather than I don't know where I am with my testimony in the church. You don't need him to address I don't need him to try and convince me. Right. You don't need the testifying. You don't need the help in figuring out where you are with the church. You're just needing somebody to be there, somebody outside of your wife to be there and say, yeah, I agree, this is concerning and I don't have an answer for it either, but I do still feel like the church is where I need to be in this good place as well. Right. And I love that statement. It's like, okay, yeah, I can see why. And I had to do this a lot with you, right? Oh, I can see why that would be concerning. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Right.
It doesn't bother me as much as it's obviously bothering you, but I can see why it would be. And let me just hold some space for that.
Right.
And bless his heart, he's trying to do that.
Was that a Southern bless his heart, or was that a Western?
That was a Western bless his heart.
He's doing the best he can, and there's no passive aggressive intent underneath the bless his heart.
No passive aggressive in that at all. Like, really, I'm grateful that he is trying as hard as he is, and that has meant a lot to me. It hasn't changed a lot of where I am, but that's not what that's about. It has allowed us to still be together. He's a much different person to talk to than he was 15 years ago or 25 years ago. Much different than the dad I grew up with. And I really appreciate that because we have a good, pretty strong relationship.
Right. Well, and call out to your dad. He's also the only family member that has actively tried to be there for me And unfortunately, again, I'm not in that place. And because of some of the really hurtful things he's done, and he hasn't ever really apologized, I'm not in a place where I even want to take the risk to be vulnerable with him yet, but also want to hold some space and honor the fact that he has come at it in a very different way than he's ever
Yes.
talked to me about anything we've disagreed
Yes.
on ever before. So there's that growth there. And again, I have to be able to say, I appreciate the growth. I'm still not ready, especially after what happened on there, because your family has definitely, since this whole thing started, I'm that scapegoat. And because of my trauma growing up of being the scapegoat in my family, I'm like, oh, hell no. If you're going to blame me for
Right.
this and not acknowledge some of the other issues, because I'm not saying I'm free of responsibility
Sure.
from where you are at, because we're in a relationship. So obviously that's very fluid, but also stop putting 100% of the blame on me, because when you blame me, you're ignoring all of this other stuff, which is
Yeah.
exactly why people scapegoat. So once again, read the room.
Right. Well, and I appreciate what he's done. I think I've told you a couple times now that if you were in the right space, I think that my dad would be able to hold space with where you are. I think, right? I don't know for
Right.
sure. I think that he would. But in this case, you're not in the space to allow that right now. And that's okay too.
Right? I'm not ready to take that risk because
Right.
my past experiences have not been positive for
Right.
me.
And as you mentioned, there's some underlying struggle there still too.
Right.
And so that's the way that it
Yeah.
happens sometimes.
All right, so we're gonna bring sister-in-law in now, and we'll go from there, and we'll let her introduce herself. All right, so wife of brother number 2 has joined us. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Shannon, and I have been an active practicing mainstream Christian since as long as I can remember. I'm going to Sunday schools, vacation Bible schools, church camps, women's retreats, the whole 9 yards. Just always have been active in the church that I attend. And I am married to brother
Number 2. Right. And
Sorry.
once again, no, you're fine. Once again, for clarification, we've labeled brothers in the order that they responded to Mason. And if you actually go back and look at that shit show of text, you're going to see that we mislabeled which brother communicated in what order, but we're committed to those numbers now. So.
Okay. Yeah, so I married Cody about 11 years ago. Knew him for about a year or so prior to getting married, before I joined the Westbrook family, and it has been interesting.
Interesting, yeah. And we're going to be able to take an opportunity at a future podcast to really dig into what you mean by interesting.
Okay.
Okay, so what were some of your responses to what I have lovingly been calling the family shit show from about a week ago? What were some of your responses to that?
I was saddened
Okay, how come?
because these are brothers, sisters, mothers, father, all of the father, and it's not supposed to be so contentious. I would have expected some of this contention by going back through and reading it. I would expect this type of contention against people that you really hated or that were really offensive to you or have done something wrong to you. But some of the responses were just horrible, and it was very sad. And I think when I finally had chimed in, I was like, hey guys, look, everybody is on their own life journey, we can learn a few things listening to other people. It was just very,
Yeah.
It was shocking to read some of the messages, and it was very just sad.
Yeah, it really was. I was shocked too when I finally chimed in. Obviously, I was pretty shocked and disgusted as well. What really stood out to you when you say it was really shocking to me? What would you say was some of that really shocking stuff?
I think there's a couple of things. One is one of the brother, I think it was brother number one, had, really just come off harsh and harsh, abrasive, brash, just in regards to an invite. And it simply was just an invite to the podcast. And it was almost like he had to say something to prove that anything anybody said against what he believed, it wasn't going to work. He has his own beliefs, and he was very defensive of them. Almost, when somebody's so defensive of something, it's because they're not sure of, or they have doubts of. It almost seemed like that. Like, why is he so defensive? I just don't know why he's so defensive, but it was very defensive.
Would you say that you felt it was like over defensive?
I do, and I don't know what. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know why it was, but this particular person seems to have a very heightened response to opposition to what he believes, and I don't know what has caused his heightened response. I guess that's probably a better way to say it.
So what I hear you saying is you're not surprised because you've seen this heightened response before?
From this person.
So from brother number one, you've seen these types of overly defensive responses before.
And I don't know why they hit him so hard, or why he's so just aggressive with his opposition and so defensive of his religion or his faith, whatever he chooses to call it. I don't know. Or
political beliefs. I would say that I've seen this in political beliefs as well.
Yes, and even discussing topics like things that have come up in the news, like flat Earth or something like that. There's a very, very passionate.
Right.
He's very passionate.
Right, but with like his fingers in his ears, not willing to listen to anything else. Like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to preach, but nobody is going to say anything in response, because that doesn't feel safe for some unknown reason. Right.
Or if you do say something in response, you are then personally attacked.
Right. So meaning personally attacked, like your character, or what do you mean by that?
Oh, absolutely. Anything that can be attacked about you, attacked. Okay. All around, everything. It's a full-on, we're at war.
Sounds like you've had some personal experience with this.
Unfortunately, I have.
You sound a little emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not my first rodeo with this family member either. And I'm going to agree with you. I am a licensed professional, and while I can't say I know what the underlying cause is, because I truly don't, which is appropriate, because if that individual's not ready to share it, it's not my place to dig. And if that individual was willing to share it, I don't have that kind of a relationship for me to be the person that he comes to. But what I can say is that there definitely seems to be some type of deep wound, I would guess a deep emotional wound, that elicits such a strong response. Because people, when we have really strong defense mechanisms, there's always an explanation for it. And I am going to use that all-inclusive word there. There is an explanation for it. Unfortunately, we do not always know what that is. So, yeah, brother number one's responses have been very painful for those of us who are in any way of transition. So, much like you said Cody has been, or with you and Cody and your relationship and your mixed faith relationship, and now with myself on the outside, and now extending that to Mason as he's kind of exploring how Mormonism fits in his life now. Absolutely. What else really stood out to you as being really painful or hurtful?
There were some other things. There was some passive aggressiveness that I could see, and the passive aggressiveness was more so in the forms of questions. Just I don't know. I don't know how to. I wish I had the vocabulary. It was just more like a passive aggressive way. Is that's the best I can say.
Well, yeah, let me build on that a little bit here, Shannon. So I think please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I think you're referring to is when they would ask a question and then answer it in the same text conversation box. So it wasn't a question meant to be answered because they were genuinely curious, rather a question that is then answered saying, I already have decided what the answer is to this, therefore I'm not giving you a voice to actually answer the question that I asked.
I mean, I think that could be part of it. I also think that, just instead of just accepting the invitation, it was kind of the third degree of questioning.
Yeah, like he was being interrogated almost.
Kind of, and it was, and I don't know that this person particularly was out to be grouchy about it. It's just the kind of, within this family, it's just kind of a common thread. It's almost like a defensiveness, challenging. It just can't be.
Right. Almost like the skill to have open dialogue when people are in disagreement has not yet been developed.
I mean, that kind of sounds like mean to say it that way, because it kind of seems like it's kind of putting that person down, if you will. And but at the same time, I kind of agree with it. It's
right.
I don't know if this particular family that I've joined, if this is just the way that they have always been, and they've always been in very small communities of the same faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so having opposition is just not something that they've had a lot of exposure to. I'm totally guessing, completely just don't know if that's a factual thing, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think kind of that's what it feels like anyway.
So let me speak on that a little bit, because I agree with you. In no way, shape, or form am I trying to disparage anybody or say, oh, you're an underdeveloped person. But rather, one of the things that we see or that I see quite frequently in my LDS clients that have grown up in what I like to call the Mormon bubble, meaning those highly populated LDS communities, specifically like Utah, lots of parts of Arizona, Idaho, this Mormon belt thinking is that we tend to have neurological development around certain skills when we are exposed to opposition. So like what you're talking about, if your primary interactions have always been within the Mormon bubble, where you never really had strong conversations with somebody about a different religion or a different viewpoint, or where you're not surrounded by diversity and whatnot, you just don't develop the skill of being able to hold space for diversity or differences in the same way as somebody who meets that type of experience on a regular basis. So speaking for myself, when I left Arizona to follow Mason on his military career, I said some really naive, ignorant things in the beginning of his career to these people who believed differently or who saw the world differently or from different ethnic backgrounds and all of these. I said some really stupid shit. And it wasn't because I was trying to be hurtful, but I had not gained the skill of holding space for people that were different from me, because I grew up in Snowflake, where the majority of the people around me thought the way I did, dressed the way I did, had the same morals and values and religious belief systems that I did. They were the same color as me. Like, I didn't experience anything different for a prolonged period of time. Therefore, I was innocently racist. Or maybe even ignorantly racist. Yeah, absolutely. Share something about that.
Well, just actually relating to myself, because I think I may have created a bubble for myself with my kids. I have kids and they're all different backgrounds. And one of my children, who happens to have brown skin, she We were in the mainstream Christian church. We did have other people that were of different, races and ethnicities and whatnot in our church. We had always been around all different types of people, but we actually went to in Arizona. There's a store called Food City, and Food City is primarily Hispanic people that go there. That's just the way it is.
Right.
So we went to this store with a friend of mine that we were going to have a Mexican type feast, whatever. So we went there, and my kids were super glued to my body. And my one child said, "Mom, I don't think we're in Gilbert anymore." And I started laughing so hard, and I'm like, "Honey." And she was like, "Mom, everybody is brown." I'm like, "Sweet girl, look at your arms."
Right.
And it was just, so I think we do have a tendency to really kind of have our own bubbles growing up. And if we don't get out, I think I agree with that. If we don't get out and experience different ethnicities and cultures more so, because we had the ethnicities and the races, but we didn't have the culture. And this was a whole different culture walking into the store. I think that we do suffer, huh?
Yeah, I believe that we do. I can say that I did not realize that racism was still a problem in our country until Mason and I adopted Abigail, who is Black, and we became a direct victim of racism. And then within that Mormon construct, watching how all of these people that I had interacted with no friction, and then Abby joined our family, and seeing this friction towards my infant daughter, who of course hasn't done anything wrong because she's a newborn baby, but to actually witness that and experience that was very eye-opening and gave me a newfound respect for those individuals in our country who continue to feel discriminated against, because now that I've experienced it, I can't deny that it feels real. And I would say that it is still an ongoing issue, maybe not at the level that the media likes to portray, but it's absolutely still going on a regular basis. And I would have had no idea, being a white female, I would have had no idea had Mason and I not adopted a very dark-skinned Black little baby. So yeah, I think it's not disparaging on the family, but speaking to, if you've always surrounded yourself by people who agree like you, or think like you, worship like you, look like you, your brain does not develop that openness and that comfort to be around and dialogue people who view the world differently.
I can see that a little bit more now. I can see that a little bit more now, definitely, and I think that's accurate.
Well, thank you. Were you surprised by the family's responses when Mason sent out that invitation? Were you shocked at? I mean, I know you said you were saddened, but were you shocked or surprised that this was how things went?
It was very disheartening. Going on, one of them compared, was comparing.
Layman,
Cain and Abel, and
Layman, Lemuel, and Nephi.
Correct. And I don't know the Layman and Lemuel from the Book of Mormon, but I do know the Cain and Abel, and I was just, it's like, oops, that's a little bit much.
Right.
I was taken back by that response. It was, and Cody, my husband, was as well. He was, I don't mean to speak for him, and he can speak on his own behalf, but to me, he did let me know that was a shock to him as well. It was basically comparing, I believe, Mason, if I read it correctly, to Cain.
Yeah.
And Cain killed Abel, and I'm thinking...
And that was the reason to
really
not listen. Right, and that was the reason utilized to not listen to your brother's opinion. Well, and I would like to definitely say that sister, so sister number one, reached out to Mason on an individual basis and actually gave a very sincere, heartfelt apology, which which we're very grateful for. And she was able to kind of clarify where she was going, and that was not her intent. But absolutely, in the heat of the moment when that came across, that's how I read it as well, which is why I was like, Mace, can I say something on your phone? Because I was not included in the thread. And I was like, let me have that phone. This is Sarah, and I, kind of, don't treat my husband this way. Like, I set a very strong boundary with the F word in there. And of course, the focus was then on the fact that I had swore, not what I had said. And that was my fault. I know better. I wasn't concerned about utilizing the F word in the company of the people that were on that thread. That's just who I am. And I will filter myself when the children are there and whatnot, but this is who I am. On the flip side, recognizing that by utilizing that strong word, the point that I was trying to make was absolutely lost. And that's
Correct.
an area where I need to, dial back and recognize, hey, I was definitely responding in defense of my husband. And for that almost that shock factor, like, wake up.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it obviously backfired. And I'll take ownership in that.
Yes.
Yeah. I think the response that I was most surprised by was the husband of sister number one, because he's always been fairly neutral and kind of quiet in these types of situations. And I know that you had a response to that one. Do you want to talk about that? Police officer, brother,
yes,
in-law.
I know who it is. I don't know that I think when there was a meme that had come up, that one of them said it was like a warrior, like, because everybody was fighting. I was like, okay, really?
Right.
The warrior was not needed. I don't know if I actually addressed that, other than agreeing with somebody who said that this was sad, and I said, yes, it's sad. It's just sad. I don't know that I responded to that particular person, because I think Cody may have. I'm not sure. I can go back and look, but I didn't know how to. I didn't know what to say. I was shocked. I was taken back, and sometimes you have that response of, I just need to process my view has been changed of somebody, or I didn't think that would happen, or that person would say this or that or whatnot.
So
and
can you give
a couple of things that I was shocked with?
Yeah, can you give our listener a little bit of background, be a little bit more specific of what was said that you're responding to? Because I think I know, but I'd like for you to be able to clarify, so that way we're all following you.
This is just hard, because I'm an in-law already, and I'm already on the outskirts, and so
hey, but
I love
see,
these people,
right?
and
I love these people, but I absolutely love these people. I was going to say, yes, you're the in-law, and you've kind of been the target of this for a lot longer than I have. But yes. I'm almost worse now than you, because I was a member and left. Therefore, now I'm an apostate, versus you, who have never been Orthodox, practicing Mormon. I know you got baptized at one point, and we'll go into that in our deep dive episode. But I mean, other than that brief, I got dunked in the water. You've never really practiced Mormonism. And so, if you can give us a little bit of clarity, what was said and why was this shocking and hard for you? Go ahead.
Okay, because I think I respect this person more so than some of the other people. This person has been very kind to me.
You're talking about police officer. Hang on. You're talking about police officer, husband to sister number one. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, and he's never been mean to me. He's always been very loving and outgoing, for the kids and everything. There was just not been very many, if any, negative, interactions, if you will. And so I think that it's, him, he has never been a fan of yours, apparently. And with this, coming out, he's very much against any advice that essentially your education has puffed your brain up a little bit, and that he has no regards for your opinion or advice, and that he basically would never take it, which is completely his priority to do. But then it was a little bit then he addressed Mason, and and because Mason is walking with you through this, he's it seems like, from what I understood what he said, that he is losing or lost respect for Mason as well. And I think that when you're, just because you're changing or you're moving or you're growing, I think that's, if you're a Bible believing Christian or claim to be a Christian in any way, that the best thing to do in those situations would be to pray and to love and to show up.
Yeah.
And
rather than you've lost your brain, your wife is a bad influence on you, you can't think for yourself anymore, and I've lost respect for you.
Yeah, I just don't think that this is the best way to handle all of it. I think that, definitely praying for each other. I mean, joining in prayer. I mean, that's going to give peace right there, in my opinion.
Right.
And knowing that, hey, I know you're going through a difficult time. I'm here for you. Do you have any questions? Can I help you through anything? And then if there is a question that comes up, if they do confide in you of any sort, then you are open and willing to hear and have those hard discussions. And maybe their beliefs have changed. And why have their beliefs changed? Is it from hurt? Is it from pain? What's going on? Like, do you love them, or do you just want to criticize them? Do you love them, or do you want to reject them?
Right.
What's love? If we're all going to church and we are all professing Christ's love, what does that look like? Because this thread was not it.
Right. That almost hypocritical Mormons believe in extending forth a hand of love, going after the one that's lost in love, and this was definitely not a demonstration of what they professed to believe either.
I think it was just kind of, they were shocked, like almost like they needed to defend something, and just coming at attacking in an attacking way, and it just didn't go over very well.
Yeah,
it was just sad.
Yeah, so one of the things, I agree, it was absolutely heartbreaking, for sure. One of the things that really stood out to me was that, I know you, and I've heard you say, people will disagree with me and they'll say things to me and nobody comes to my defense. What was it like for you to see the family ganging up on me in that way, and having that, like the follow-up of the dinosaur meme of big head, little arms, and to not have anybody other than you and your spouse kind of be that advocate for, hey, y'all need to simmer down? What was that like for you to see that happening to somebody else?
Again, I just don't know of another word. It grieved me. I was like, my husband is losing touch with his family. Like, these are relationships that you hope to continue into your adulthood, and then your children, play and have cousins. And we live really close to a couple of the families, and we have little to no interaction. And that's heartbreaking. Yeah. I had this envision of just a lot of family get-togethers and fun, and it seems like the religion has really gotten to the point where in my opinion, that it's just not, it doesn't happen. And then of course there's been a few other incidences that I don't wish to share that have really been detrimental for the family environment, and so we just can't do some of that stuff now anyway. But there's been the dynamic, it was just very sad. I was just really hoping that the family would come together and would somehow, they'd not agree, maybe not even approve, but cordial, polite, loving, respectful. I just, those are things I thought would happen, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And I think I rambled a bit, and I apologize.
I don't think you rambled at all. I think you very eloquently stated what was missing. And I think also what a lot of our listeners that are in faith transition, they want exactly what you just described. They want to be understood. I would say that while there's kind of that desperation of, I wish you could see things from a different viewpoint in order to be more informed about the religion that you are prescribing to and living your life, giving your entire life to. I wish you could see that a little bit more similarly to how I see it from the outside. But really, I think what people are looking for is still love me, even though I'm no longer a part of that structure, still show up for me, still be there for me, the
Right?
way that we feel that Jesus taught families are supposed to. So I think you explained that very, very beautifully.
Thank you.
My last question for you, Shannon, is knowing the potential for increased negative familial responses because you are a guest today, and then we're going to kind of dive into your experiences in the future. What is your main reason for agreeing to come on to the podcast and kind of talk about this today?
Well, first of all, it's not done lightly. My heart is pounding and I feel nauseated.
Oh, goodness. That anxiety response
I'm very,
is hard.
nervous about the backlash. I'm very nervous about the response that my husband will get, that I will get, that our children will get. I don't think that they would be mean to our children, but I think it's just like the trickling down effect. So please,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're going to come and be mean to my kids. I just think it's a trickling down effect for the loss of the family.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I can say that my kids who are old enough to have some awareness of what is going on are really struggling to see grown-ups treat their parents in this way. So while they're not actively harming my children, that secondary or that cascading response, my kids are really struggling to see people that they've looked up to be so cruel to their mother and father. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I hope that by coming on that there'll be another viewpoint heard, that it doesn't have to be this way, that we can all get along. I think by protecting names, if you will, and speaking in generalities, I just want everybody to understand that I still love everybody. I love all of them. I can't be around certain ones for long. If there's passion or heat or something going on, with the conversation, I now will kind of step away. But that family is important, that my kids need their family. And it's not just me and my husband, it's the extended family. And that I want this family to heal, and I want this family to learn, and I want this family to just really grow from these experiences so our kids can be better.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're saying, hey, let's do better so that our kids do better. Because you're not just talking about do better within their immediate relationships, but like our kids are tomorrow's future. Let's teach them how to engage differently so that they can learn the skills that we didn't.
Yeah, I agree. And I would like to say also at the end, of all this thread, I think we're calling him Father. He very much was like, when people were coming back and saying, oh, this was not a good conversation. And I'm, like you said, one of them had come to you and said, I'm so sorry for this conversation of what happened. It was just the passion and the heat of the moment. And there's been some things, come back in apologies or just recognition of what's happened. And so I think that the dad or the father of the family, the headship, if you will, said that, he hoped that we could all learn a valuable lesson in communication. And he said, I know I did. And then the mother liked his comment. And so she agreed with him. And I thought that was really, 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 really good. That was a perfect ending.
Yeah, I feel like father-in-law has really demonstrated some significant growth in the way that he is interacting with me personally, because my relationship with father-in-law has always been strained, and for reasons I still to this day do not understand. But I would say that over the last couple of years, I've seen improvement towards me. And I would agree with you, Shannon, that his response at the end of, I really hope we learned something. I very much appreciated that response from him as well.
Right. So did I. I was like, well, it actually, honestly, going through all of that, it kind of made me feel a little better. Like, where mother-in-law was saying that she prays for peace in the family, and just those types of that comment, and that she understood that, this was passion and, that came, but I think it was a lot of wounding too, behind that passion.
Yeah. Well, and the challenge there is that they might be acknowledging the passion that led to the hurt comments, but I don't think anything was said about the people that were wounded by the comments. And I'm not talking about just Mason and I either. You know, nothing was said about the wounds that maybe my F word had caused, or like that, the pain was not acknowledged. The attack may have been acknowledged by father and mother-in-law. But the pain that those actions are inflicting, right, yeah. Did you just say scapegoating?
No, I just said I said I agree with you that the hurt was not addressed per se, but that but the comments and whatnot, and I think that it just gave me hope. I think their comments were not complete, perhaps, or weren't the perfect comment, but I think it was just giving me some hope. Like, no, they're here, and they're going to be praying for this, and we just need to continue to work on these relationships and to learn how to communicate within the family. Because if not, honestly, there's going to be, a couple clicks. We get along with this person and we get along with this person, but nobody can get together, and it's a real travesty. And so, yeah.
Well, and I love that you said that, because really what you're referring to is recognition is the first step to repair and healing. So I agree that first step has been taken, and I really hope that we can continue to heal and move forward, because I think the family is worth it. Of course. And we've got to respect and learn some things along the way in order to maintain that. But yeah, I think that the recognition really went a long way. So
I do too.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Did you have anything else you wanted to share before I hang up with you?
I have no idea.
All right. I'm going to take that as a no. If anything else comes up, jot it down. And then when we get back together here in the near future to do your deep dive in your experiences, we can absolutely address those at that time. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Love you, sis. So welcome back, Mason. We really need to get a third microphone so that way you're not silenced during some of this, when you're like in the room but not commenting.
When Hayden was here, it was hard for me to not make some comments. This time I actually was just, I appreciated just being able to hear her story. Like there was no time where I was like, oh, I got to get up, I got to say something. I was able to just listen, and I appreciated that.
Yeah. So. I really appreciated Shannon's genuine openness and kind of that plea, because I would say her plea went out to the family, but by extension, coming on the podcast, it kind of went out into the world of,
absolutely.
Hey, y'all, we can disagree with religion and still have healthy, familial connections and show up for people, and we can be kind and compassionate. And I would just like to add to that, the way that we get there is by recognizing the responses, that almost that nonverbal, those responses that we're having in dialogue, and then adjust our communication patterns to hold space for that. And I know that's a lot easier said than done, but to be able to validate and connect with people, and then boundary up and say, hey, we're not ready yet to talk about the church. And not so much as in, we can't hear what you have to say because you're wrong, so you have to be silent, but rather, hey, neither of us are really in a place for this family activity where we can really give this a good, the attention and the time and the space that it needs without it turning into something nasty. Let's hold off and address this at a different time. Yeah. Like, we can do this. We can do better. And I'm talking about both those who are active in their faith and those that are transitioning or now out of that faith. All of us can do better. I know you and I could have done better showing up in that text.
Well,
thread.
And I think that's helpful for all of us to be able to look at the conversation and go, well, yeah, maybe I wasn't the big catalyst of this. Like the message I sent, I don't think was a big catalyst to this argument. But without the message, there wouldn't have been the argument at all.
Right.
So, and just recognizing how people are going to respond. I actually love the fact that there are several people on this text strain, and they all responded differently. Some in positive ways, some in negative ways. And it would be a lot easier if everybody just responded in a healthy, positive way.
We didn't even get to brother number 3.
Right. Everybody responded differently, and there's things to learn. I'm glad we were able to kind of break down the responses, because there's things to learn that we can do better on this side of the argument, and things that other people might learn as well.
I would challenge you to rephrase that, not on this side of the argument. I would change that word to maybe on this side of the discussion, because the goal is not to argue. The goal is to be able to dialogue, and when there's uncomfortable emotional responses that occur because of that dialogue, to be able to shift our responses so that we're validating the uncomfortable feeling while still extending forth that hand of love. And in the Gottman curriculum, what we learn is that you have to turn off your own worldview and listen with the intent of understanding.
Yes.
And then not responding until you're certain that the speaker, so, in this case, Mason, if you and I are having a dialogue and you recognize that I'm having an uncomfortable response, for you to then shift into, help me understand. Okay, yes, I understand.
Yeah.
And then, do you feel like I understand at least as much as I can without having lived it? And then for me to say, yeah, I do. And then we switch and say, well, this is how I think and feel. And then I get to be that person that says, okay, so let me check in. Is this what you're saying? Do you feel like I understood? And then once we both feel like, both of us understand the other person's worldview, then we shift into problem solving from a creative brain space rather than that defensive brain space. And that's, again, easier said than done. For more information, go look at the 7 principles for making marriage work and the Gottman work, because they really dig into that communication skill. And then also I agree with Shannon in one of the things that's lacking in your family is that religion and politics really, in your family, everybody is so passionate about their worldview and their belief system without being willing to consider anybody else's, that there isn't that barrier, because it's not a boundary, it's a barrier, stops the family from being able to engage differently in a way that's nurturing and connective and growth and all of these other beautiful things. And so because of these strong opinions with religion and politics, it's really fragmenting the family, so that I think we're all in our own way floundering and feeling alone and unheard and unappreciated.
Well, if somebody has a tendency to bluster, which is kind of what happens in this situation that you're talking about with my family, then you kind of have this underlying, well, as soon as this person starts talking, I'm going to stop listening, because this is what he always does, or she always does, or they always do, which isn't ever true. Like, nobody always does anything.
Right.
But you get this underlying, like, oh, not again, right? And instead of approaching it from a curious place and actually trying to understand, you just shut it off, and it's just not healthy.
I think what you're talking about and how we word that in my profession is that we are listening to respond rather than listening to understand.
Yes, I've heard that before, yeah.
And so my encouragement to our listeners is, number one, read the room. If your family is not in the brain space to engage with you, to understand, or to get curious, you're going to need to course correct, because if you push, it's going to backfire, which is where we come up with that word, the backfire effect, if you push on people.
Because we've all been on that side of things too, where we feel pushed. So, yeah.
Right. And then that second piece of what we can do. So listener, the thing that you can do is set an intention to start listening to people so that you can understand where they're coming from rather than listening to respond. That's step number one. If you find that doing that hurts you, then it might be time to disengage until you've had some,
Yeah.
outside help, or until things have come to a different place. I'm here to say, I am recognizing, Mason, that your dad is responding differently. I'm not yet healed enough or in a space where I can accept that. And which means that I'm going to fall into that old pattern of listening to respond rather than listening to understand. Something that I do in my clinic really well is listen to understand. But then you toss me into these family dynamics where there's a lot of unresolved trauma.
Yeah.
I revert back into my I'm listening to respond.
Amygdala, right?
Yeah, that amygdala is a bitch.
Well, and no amount of education and practice will completely stop that amygdala response. So it's not, I need to know this so that I don't do that. It's, I need to know this so that when it happens, I can respond in a way that's more in line with what I want.
Right. What you're talking about is I need to recognize when my amygdala has taken over as best as I can. There's sometimes it happens so quick. We just don't recognize it. But as we get better at it and more practiced, more skilled at this, we get to a place where I can say, oh, that's my amygdala. I'm going to wait to respond until my physiology has calmed down and I can approach this that way.
Right, absolutely.
So in closing, Mason, I do want to touch on one more thing. This episode's definitely longer than our normal 90 minutes, and that's okay. But I want to respond in the past. I've encouraged you and you've agreed that we weren't going to stand up and tell your family, stop blaming Sarah or stop this with Sarah. And a lot of that was just where we were, and we didn't want to cause that contention. And I think the thing that really helped us the best, that silver lining for us that came out of this is that you came to a place where it's stop blaming my wife, stop judging her, because you just don't know her and you're going to hold. I really appreciate the fact that you've rededicated yourself to holding your family accountable for your placing judgments on her that you don't have any basis for because you don't have a relationship with her. But also the name calling and disparaging against my wife. I'm done. Like I have zero tolerance for it anymore. And I want to say that out loud, that I appreciate that growth. And also put that plug in, you didn't not stick up for me before because you didn't want to. You didn't because you and I agreed it wasn't the right time.
Right.
And I think that this conversation has led us to, it's the right time. I cannot allow my family to utilize Sarah as the scapegoat any longer, because when they do that, it is stopping us from healing. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. And it also helps me feel a lot better about myself.
Well, thank you.
Like when you come up and when you told, even though the husband to sister number one has not apologized and has crickets, I feel like you are set up that if it happens again, you will be able to shut that down and say, enough, do not treat my wife with this level of disrespect. I think that that's important. Like there has to be boundaries. And I think that this experience has let us say, you can't say these disparaging things out of the excuse of being passionate or whatever. You have to treat my wife with respect.
Right.
And also vice versa, that if I start attacking your family's character, that you will also be that, hey, Sarah, you're attacking character, and call me out when I do it as well, which I deeply appreciate. Yeah. So did you have any final thoughts, Mason, that you wanted to share before we go today?
No, thank you for being here today. Thank you for being with us in vulnerable moments. And I know many of you have gone through some of these things, and I hope that us going through this is helpful in that process. It's certainly been helpful for me. I hope it can be helpful for you, because most of us are nowhere near the end of this. And even if relationships have been lost, we're not usually okay with that. And so if we can learn better how to manage these things, then maybe other relationships won't be lost. Maybe relationships can be repaired somewhere down the road, because really that's what it's about, is connection and being with the people that we care about.
I love that, Mason, because what you've just done is like explained our motto, which is learn, grow, become. Yeah. We want you to be able to hopefully learn from our experiences, know you're not alone, grow in a way that can help you respond differently, and then become the person that you want to be, that truly authentic self, and also be safe for those who are still in struggle to find you and lean on you in the way that you need to be able to lean on somebody today.
We love you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for joining us. Unpacking Mormonism is hosted by me, Sarah Westbrook, produced by Alex Vidalas. Our music today was by Lorenzo Emanuel, and I Hope You Know by John Worthy Music.